ABC Listen. Podcasts, radio, news, music and more.
Going somewhere? If you're getting out and about soon, pack a podcast that'll take you on a real journey. Binge all seasons of ABC's Expanse podcast. There's spies, survival, grand heists and supernatural sightings. These are the stories of Australia you probably haven't heard, but won't be able to stop talking about once you do. All 4 seasons are available now. Just search Expanse on the ABC Listen app.
Hi, it's Sam here. Thanks to everyone who's been in touch about the issues that you want us to focus on during this campaign. Lots of you have been in touch about energy policies, and we're going to have a look at that really soon. But there's still more time, so keep emailing us those short voice notes. In 2.5 weeks' time, you'll be heading to the polling booth to decide who you want to lead the country for the next 3 years. Right now, the polls tell us Anthony Albanese is on track to be elected again, with Peter Dutton's apparent nods to Trump, like appointing a shadow minister for government efficiency, seemingly backfiring. Today, the host of 7:30, Sarah Ferguson, who's living and breathing this campaign, on what you need to know, and her analysis on a listener question about the backstories of the leaders and whether they resonate with voters. I'm Sam Hawley on Gadigal land in Sydney. This is ABC News Daily. Sarah, let's begin our discussion with this question we received from Chris.
My question is around the backstories of both of the leaders. Really, how much relevance do they have to the voter? How much resonance do they have? And really, can we believe those stories, considering they have both been in politics and in Parliament and in the Canberra bubble for so long? Thanks.
Let's start with the PM. He has in the past repeatedly referenced, of course, growing up in public housing with a single mum. Is he still doing that, and does it resonate with voters at this point?
I think it's right to say, Sam, that he is still doing it in the sense that it's always there. It's always a layer of his presentation of himself. And the key thing about it is that I think, like him or loathe him, there is an acceptance amongst the voters that there is authenticity to that story and how it relates to him today.
My fellow Australians, it says a lot about our great country that the son of a single mum who was a disability pensioner, who grew up in public housing down the road in Camperdown, can stand before you tonight as Australia's Prime Minister.
But it's deeper than that. It's not just a journey from public housing to Prime Minister, but it comes back to that notion of authenticity in Anthony Albanese and the fact that he is so clearly racinated in that world. He says it also protects him from woke politics, as he says. There's something in that upbringing that he says gives him a means of judging when something is too woke, to use that phrase. It's funny, I was just listening to Albanese this morning at a press conference in Hobart. He was being asked about May the 4th. He talked about being a Star Wars fan. He'll be watching a Star Wars movie.
I know, hopefully, I have a bit of a tradition of watching a Star Wars movie on May the 4th, and I'm an old Star Wars guy. To get that out of the way, the first 3 movies are the best.
Then there was a question about Marmite and Vegemite.
Let's be clear here. Pro-Vegemite, any Marmite, that's my position. And
now, some of this is just campaign silliness, but at the same time, Albanese can talk about those things without appearing to pretend. There isn't a note of falsity when he talks about very ordinary things like that. So I think in summary, Sam, it's important. It's part of the layers, if you like, the topography of Albanese's political development. People see it. Yes, they know it. Yes, he still talks about it. But I think people accept that it is a fact of authenticity in his political presentation.
I was going to say, of course, most Australians at this point would know that story. They've heard it.
Yes.
But what about Peter Dutton? He has mentioned quite a bit during this campaign that before he entered politics, he was a police officer. What is he doing there? Showing voters that he was once, I guess, a real person.
I think that's right. It's an interesting thing with Peter Dutton, the weighting in his character between Peter Dutton, the policeman, and Peter Dutton, the successful businessman.
I stand before you as a former police officer, as someone who started and successfully ran a number of small businesses. As a parliamentarian,
obviously, the story of Peter Dutton is in many ways an archetypal liberal story of aspiration. I think his father was a bricklayer, his mother was a secretary. They made significant sacrifices for his education. The thing about his career in the police force, he was very young when he joined the Queensland Police. He was 18 years old. Now, he worked there for 9 years. He worked in drugs. He worked for a significant period of time in the sex offenders unit. And anybody who works in the sex offenders unit of any police force in Australia has seen very difficult things. You cannot come away from that unmarked. So I think there's a sincerity in the way that Peter Dutton talks about those experiences in his life. But obviously there's a longer period of time where he's a successful businessman. He's obviously built a very successful property portfolio. So two parts of Peter Dutton's background, I think slightly less well understood by the electorate, but they've led to an evolution in his political life that probably is more influenced by the latter, that is by his involvement in building a successful property portfolio, than it is his career in the police, notwithstanding that leaves deep marks on the soul.
All right, but he, like Anthony Albanese, of course, is now a very seasoned politician. They both are. And you've interviewed them.
On your one, why doesn't that add up to being a bribe?
Well, it provides support to people now who are really hurting.
If that person says, I feel worse off than when you came to office 3 years ago, what are you going to say? They're wrong?
You would have been far worse off had Peter Dutton gotten his way.
What do you make of them, Sarah? I want to kind of get an insight into what you think there, because you have had, close contact with them, good interviews with them.
Well, I think the one thing that you have to always acknowledge with Australian politicians is that anybody who is at the top of Australian politics is going to be a very sophisticated interlocutor. Even whether you like, dislike, whatever the audience feels about what it is they're saying, these are people who are well trained. Now, one of the decisions that Peter Dutton made in the course of the last year before the election campaign was not to do as many interviews with places that he would regard as less sympathetic to his agenda. Now, he went for a year without coming on our program, for example. He did a lot more interviews with Sky, with commercial talkback radio hosts. But in a sense, he kept himself in something of a bubble. So when you come to an election campaign and suddenly it's all on for young and old and questions are coming at you right, left and centre, you're possibly less prepared for that. And then you have a situation with Anthony Albanese where, he's not the most spectacular speaker. He's an ordinary speaker. But now he's in a position where he has to be incredibly careful. So that makes him quite a frustrating interview because he is stepping extremely carefully through every answer. He's obviously reverting to practiced answers, but these are sophisticated people and it's very hard to break down the practiced answers.
All right. So, Sarah, we are about halfway through the campaign. The polls are swinging towards Anthony Albanese. So I really want to unpack how the campaign is going for both of these leaders. Now, the Trump factor, why don't we just start there, because that is a real thing and it's something that both these leaders need to deal with constantly, isn't it?
I think it's going to turn out to be one of the most significant elements of this campaign, and the timing is crucial here, Sam. So, for example, the opposition's announcement of a department or position of government efficiency, echoing very strongly the Doge Department of Elon Musk in the United States, was announced just a couple of days after Donald Trump's inauguration.
So she will take on the important role of Shadow Minister for Government Efficiency. There is a lot of waste that's been generated over the course of the last 2.5 years,
And if you can take your mind back to there, at that time, whether people liked or didn't like Donald Trump, there were a lot of people who felt that maybe there was something good in the disruption, that maybe they didn't like him, maybe they didn't like the way he spoke, but he pushed back on wokeness, he liberated people to feel that they could speak more freely, and maybe something good would come out of a disruption of the recognised order. And at the very beginning, it looked like this might have some value. So all of that sort of pro-Trump, echoing Trumpian language, Department of Efficiency for Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price, they look like a pretty sure bet, I think, at the end of last year and at the beginning of this year. And then, of course, it turned horrible in the United States. What did we see but these terrible stories of people being fired, governments being dismantled, possibly people dying from the cancellation of US aid, horrible stories of people being mistreated. So all of the things that could possibly be good about reforming government, making it more streamlined, went out the window in the face of all of this, what looked like careless cruelty. And then on top of that come the tariffs. So suddenly anything associated with Trump is toxic to Australian politics. And I think it's really hurt the Liberal campaign.
Yeah, because Peter Dutton then has to really take a step back and try and unravel himself from this sort of Trumpism that, you know, he had been connected to. A message, by the way, that the Coalition Senator Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price didn't seem to get.
Well, you know, there's something in this because they had spent some time dismissing these claims that they were embracing Trumpian ideology. You know, that obviously the government went very hard on it. I think Jim Chalmers used the phrase doji sycophants.
This is Doji Dutton taking his cues, his instructions and his policies straight from the US in a way that will make Australians worse off.
Which is potent, but, you know, the coalition was pushing back hard. So then to hear Jacinta Nampijinpa-Price on a roll use Make Australia Great Again, you can't get away from it.
We can make Australia great again, that we can bring Australia back to its former glory.
You know, she claimed afterwards that she didn't know she'd said it, but, you know, you say things because they're in your mind. And so that put the coalition in a very tough position, and it sort of bled into what is a completely local issue, that of working from home. So it, if you like, it further coloured something which really was a major disaster for the coalition.
In an extraordinary about-face, the coalition will no longer pursue an end to work-from-home arrangements for public servants.
I've apologised for the decision that we took in relation to work from home. It only applied to Canberra. We strongly support flexible workplace arrangements, and
I think there's no question that in the wash-up we will see that that was one of the most significant moments, because it was a clear misreading of people's suburban experiences, particularly those people who commute a long way for work.
So this has all really helped Anthony Albanese, if you like. So backing down from a major policy, all of that is really playing into the Prime Minister's hands, is it?
It's clearly been a major disadvantage. You don't get that kind of mid-campaign abject apology. It's a very unusual thing to see. To give the impression that there is something wrong with working from home per se was a terrible mistake.
All right, well, Sarah, let's just turn briefly to the campaign launches on the weekend, because both parties, of course, came out with big announcements on housing. They know that housing is a huge issue for the electorate in voters' minds. So does this change anything?
I think this is very interesting. We'll see in a few days what the impact has been in the polls. Clearly, you know, we started off energy was very important in the early weeks of the campaign, and now the pivot is to housing.
And we're backing the great Australian dream. You'll be able to buy your first home with just a 5% deposit.
A coalition government will allow you to deduct interest payments on the first $650,000 of a mortgage against your taxable income.
Now, our analysis of it is that, you know, the campaign announcements at the weekend really go to the question of spendathon, that we've got what's called a structural deficit heading into the future. That is, we're spending more than we're taking in. The question of who wins the title over economic manager was supposed to be one of the key defining questions of the campaign, but there we are at the weekend and everyone's throwing money around. So it seems like the election has changed. We're no longer on economic management.
All right. Well, Sarah, policy matters and it matters a lot, but it is really hard for voters to keep across what's on offer from the major parties. For a voter, it's pretty, I think, easy to get lost in the detail. So when they go to vote, or when we go to vote, is it the vibe that really matters? Is it a feeling of who do I trust more and who do I think I'll be better off under?
It is the question, right? Are we talking about vibe, or which are the policies that people are taking down, looking at and deciding whether or not that's attractive? I think we start off this election with the principle that removing an incumbent government is a very difficult thing to do. It is very difficult to dislodge a one-term government, so you need to be absolutely convinced that the opposition is offering a way better solution to the problems of the world. At this stage, you would have to say that the Liberals have not successfully made that case yet. And then at the same time, we're in the middle of this unbelievable global chaos, Sam, which you obviously follow very closely on your podcast. And suddenly the world looks like a very scary place. And in a very scary time, do you change your government? Do you throw everything up in the air and go for something completely different, or do you stick with what you know? Those conditions favour incumbency. In the end of last year, incumbency was the toxic thing that nobody wanted. Incumbent governments were unpopular. Disruption was the key. Now we've actually lived through that disruption, even for a short amount of time, and it turns out people don't like it. Certainly not in the Trumpian form that we're seeing it in at the moment.
All right. Well, Anthony Albanese clearly has the front foot right now. But, you know, a week is a long time in politics, as they say.
Is.
And there's a while to go yet, Sarah.
That's right. I think we know that attention comes in close and late. Obviously, early voting is a thing, so that starts. So never you'd be a mug to write off an election at this stage. That would be crazy. So, as you say, there's a way to go, but clearly the government's in front.
Sarah Ferguson is the presenter of the ABC's 7:30 program on ABC TV, Monday to Thursday. You can also watch it on iView. Don't forget to keep sending those voice memos through on the campaign issues you want us to cover. Email it to us at abcnewsdaily@abc.net.au. This episode was produced by Sydney Peed. Audio production by Adair Shepherd. Our supervising producer is David Cody. I'm Sam Hawley. ABC News Daily will be back again tomorrow with analysis of the big new housing policies. Thanks for listening.